the taxi driver who became a life coach. In a city that never truly slept, where the hum of engines and the flicker of neon lights blurred into one ceaseless melody, there lived a man named Samuel. To most, he was just another cab driver, one among thousands, navigating the intricate veins of the metropolis. But beneath his plain uniform and weathered cap, Samuel carried a story that would one day ripple out, touching lives he'd never imagined. Samuel had not always been a taxi driver. Once, in what felt like a different lifetime, he had dreams that soared higher than the skyscrapers that now loomed over him. He dreamed of making a difference, of inspiring people to break free from their limitations. But dreams have a way of fading when life's storms strike. A series of misfortunes, family illness, a failed business, the relentless grind of making ends meet, had swept Samuel off his path, leaving him adrift in survival mode. He took to driving a taxi out of necessity. It was honest work, and it allowed him to provide for his aging mother. Each night, he watched the city's stories unfold through his rearview mirror: lovers in midnight embraces, businessmen chasing deadlines, lost souls searching for answers. Over time, Samuel became a silent observer, cataloging snippets of humanity, but keeping his own dreams locked away. Yet, something curious began to happen. Passengers would climb into Samuel's cab in all manner of moods: anxious, angry, heartbroken, or simply exhausted by the world. And, for reasons unknown even to him, people found themselves opening up to Samuel. Perhaps it was the gentle cadence of his voice, the reassuring presence of someone who truly listened, or the way he knew when to offer a word and when to let silence do the talking. One rainy evening, a young woman named Claire entered his cab, her eyes swollen from crying. She barely managed to whisper her destination before dissolving into tears. As Samuel drove, he glanced at her through the mirror, weighing whether to speak. Finally, he cleared his throat and offered, "Sometimes, the hardest days teach us the most, though it rarely feels that way in the moment." Claire looked up, surprised to find compassion in the voice of a stranger. Something about Samuel's words, simple as they were, gave her permission to share her troubles: a broken engagement, the fear that she'd never be enough, the weight of expectations crushing her spirit. Samuel listened, never judging, never interrupting. When she finished, he shared a story from his own life, of loss, resilience, and the quiet strength that comes from simply enduring. By the time they reached her destination, Claire's tears had dried. She looked at Samuel and said, "You're more than just a taxi driver. You're a healer." That night, Samuel lay awake, her words echoing in his mind. He remembered his old dreams, the desire to inspire, to help others find their way. Perhaps, he thought, life had led him here for a reason. Perhaps these countless, fleeting encounters were not distractions from his purpose, but the very path to fulfilling it. From that moment, Samuel made a promise to himself: he would treat every passenger as though they were the most important person in the world. Each ride became an opportunity, not just to drive someone from point A to point B, but to offer kindness, wisdom, a listening ear. He began to study psychology in his spare time, reading books on communication, compassion, and personal growth. He jotted down observations in a worn leather notebook, patterns in people's stories, the power of a well-timed question, the resilience hidden within ordinary lives. Word began to spread. Passengers started requesting Samuel by name. They sought him out not just for a ride, but for guidance. Some called him the philosopher cabbie. Others, the city's secret sage. He coached an aspiring musician through stage fright, encouraged a struggling single mother to pursue her education, helped a young man find the courage to apologize and reconnect with his estranged father. Each journey was unique, yet bound by a common thread: the transformative power of empathy. One day, Samuel met Peter, a middle-aged executive whose outward success concealed inner emptiness. Peter confessed, "I've climbed the ladder, but I don't even know why anymore. I feel lost." Samuel listened, then asked, "If you could do anything, without fear or limitation, what would it be?" The question lingered, sparking a conversation that outlasted the ride. Over the weeks, Peter returned again and again, each time peeling back another layer of self-doubt. With Samuel's encouragement, Peter discovered a passion for mentorship, eventually leaving his corporate role to start a non-profit for underprivileged youth. As stories like Peter's multiplied, Samuel realized he was no longer content to confine his impact to the backseat of a cab. With the support of grateful former passengers, he enrolled in a counseling program, earning certifications in life coaching and emotional intelligence. He launched free workshops in community centers, teaching people to rewrite their narratives, set goals, and cultivate resilience. His classes filled quickly, word of mouth turning him into a local legend. Yet Samuel never forgot his roots. He continued to drive his taxi, seeing it as his classroom on wheels. He believed that wisdom wasn't reserved for lofty seminars, but could, and should, be shared in everyday moments. He knew that every person carried invisible burdens, and that sometimes, the smallest kindness could tip the balance between despair and hope. There was the night he picked up Javier, a recent immigrant who spoke little English and felt lonely in the vast city. Samuel listened to Javier's fears and, using gestures and simple words, reassured him that everyone feels lost at times, but belonging is built one connection at a time. He recommended a local community center, and weeks later, Javier returned, beaming, to thank Samuel for changing his life. There was the elderly woman, Mrs. Huang, who rode with Samuel after visiting her husband's grave. She shared stories of their youth, her voice trembling with both grief and gratitude. Samuel listened, holding space for her memories, reminding her that love endures in the stories we tell. There was the teenager, Maya, who was on the verge of dropping out of school, convinced she'd never amount to anything. Samuel told her about his own setbacks, about how life's detours sometimes hide the most beautiful destinations. He encouraged her to give herself another chance. Months later, Maya returned, proudly showing him her first report card full of passing grades. Through it all, Samuel remained humble. He saw himself not as a savior, but as a fellow traveler, someone who had stumbled and fallen, but learned to rise again. He believed that every life, no matter how ordinary, held the potential for greatness. He taught that success wasn't measured by wealth or status, but by the lives we touch, the kindness we offer, the courage to begin anew. His mother, once frail and worried, watched with pride as her son became a beacon in their community. She often reminded him of a saying from her own childhood, "A candle loses nothing by lighting another candle." Samuel's light, once nearly extinguished by hardship, now burned brighter with each life he touched. As the years passed, Samuel's reputation spread beyond the city. He was invited to speak at conferences, to share his story on podcasts and radio shows. People from all walks of life, students, entrepreneurs, retirees, came to learn from the taxi driver who had become a life coach. He never forgot the lessons of the road, that listening is an act of love, that wisdom can be found in the most unexpected places, that every stranger is a potential friend. One winter evening, as snow blanketed the city in silence, Samuel picked up a young man named Ethan. Ethan was on the brink of despair, jobless, estranged from his family, convinced that life held nothing but disappointment. As they drove, Samuel asked, "What's one thing you're grateful for, even in this moment?" Ethan hesitated, then whispered, "I guess, this ride." The fact that someone cares enough to ask. Samuel smiled, knowing that sometimes, hope is kindled by the smallest sparks. He shared stories of his own darkest days, of how he'd once considered giving up, only to discover that life's greatest gifts often come disguised as challenges. By the end of the ride, Ethan was not healed, but he was no longer alone. He had seen a glimmer of possibility, a reminder that even in the bleakest winters, spring waits just beneath the surface. Samuel's story reminds us that purpose is not always found on grand stages or in the glare of spotlights. Sometimes, it is woven into the fabric of daily life, into the conversations we have, the kindness we extend, the courage we show in the face of adversity. Samuel found his calling not despite his hardships, but because of them. He transformed his pain into empathy, his setbacks into stepping stones, his ordinary job into an extraordinary mission. The lesson Samuel left behind is both simple and profound: every life matters. Every encounter holds potential. We may never know how our words, our listening, our simple acts of care might change another person's path. The world is full of invisible heroes, people like Samuel, who, in quiet moments and humble places, light the way for others. So, the next time you find yourself in the company of a stranger, a cab driver, a cashier, a neighbor, remember that you hold the power to inspire, to heal, to make a difference. In a world hungry for connection, a single act of kindness can echo farther than you imagine. And, like Samuel, you may discover that the journey to purpose begins not with grand gestures, but with the willingness to listen, to care, and to believe in the possibility of transformation. Samuel's story is not just his own. It is an invitation to see the extraordinary in the ordinary, to embrace the power of empathy, and to remember that, no matter where life takes us, we can all be sources of light for one another.